I'm Mindy Kincaid in Atlanta, and this is CNN.
Hello and welcome. I'm Zain Asher in for Bianca Nobilo. This is the Global Brief. Tonight, the Israeli Prime Minister and his coalition ally agreed to dissolve parliament, which would trigger the country's fifth election in less than 4 years. Then Russia makes gains in eastern Ukraine as President Zelensky warns of intensified attacks. And a Japanese court finds the country's same-sex marriage is constitutional. We will debrief on LGBTQ plus rights in Asia ahead. And for the fifth time in just over 3 years, it appears Israel is heading for elections. The leaders of the country's fragile coalition, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, agreed just hours ago to submit a bill to dissolve parliament. That's expected next week. Mr. Bennett has been unable to keep his coalition together and after facing pressure for weeks has decided he would step aside.
In the last few weeks, we did everything we could to save this government. That in our eyes, the continuation of its existence was in the national interest. Believe me, we looked under every rock. We didn't do this for ourselves, but for our beautiful country, for you citizens of Israel.
If the bill goes through, Lapid is set to take over as Prime Minister until another general election takes place. That's in line with the original coalition deal that was made last year to remove former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from office. CNN's Hadas Gold is following these fast-moving developments from Jerusalem. Hadas joins us live now. If everything sort of goes according to the way we think it's going to go, Yair Lapid will actually be Prime Minister when President Joe Biden visits Israel. What should we make of that? What should we read into that?
I mean, it's just fascinating how the Israeli politics have worked out in the past few years. I mean, this government has been on shaky ground for a few weeks, but I don't think anybody was expecting that it would ultimately be the prime minister and the alternate prime minister, who's also foreign minister, Yair Lapid, to be the ones to dissolve the government themselves. And as you noted, under the coalition agreement, this means Yair Lapid will now take over. But ultimately, it was two members of Naftali Bennett's own right-wing party who defected in the last few weeks and months, essentially bringing down its downfall and ending Naftali Bennett's term as prime minister after just over a year. Naftali Bennett, he was not supposed to be prime minister, at least not yet. But in 2021, his small party opened the door to a new government, one that ended Benjamin Netanyahu's run as the longest-serving Israeli prime minister. And with that, the high-tech millionaire became the country's 13th prime minister.
Naftali Bennett,
leader of the right-wing party Yamina, joining forces with unlikely bedfellows to form the most diverse coalition in Israel's history. Bennett, a kippah-wearing religious former settler leader, sitting alongside left-wing parties he once derided, and the first Arab party in a governing coalition.
We knew it was going to be hard. We knew that when you put secular and religious together, right and left, and Jews and Arabs together, there are going to be bumps in the road. But that's the challenge.
With so many diametrically opposed positions, the coalition agreed to avoid major changes on lightning rod issues, especially in regard to any move towards peace talks with Palestinians. But marking achievements elsewhere, passing the first budget in nearly 4 years, building out security alliances on the back of the Abraham Accord normalization agreements. Bennett becoming the first Israeli prime minister to visit the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain.
It's a government with many achievements in comparison to its short period and narrow parliamentary majority. What it didn't succeed to do is to rescue or extract Israel from its internal cultural identity warfare. And in this respect, this government was more of a ceasefire rather than putting an end to the political deadlock.
The grand experiment, barely 1 year old, crumbling, sending Israelis once again to the polls for the fifth time in just over 3 years. This, of course, now gives former Prime Minister, now opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu an opening to return to power. He seemed quite pleased with the situation this evening when he was speaking to reporters. But in the interim, if all goes to plan, Yair Lapid will become Prime Minister, and he will be the one to welcome President Joe Biden when he arrives in Israel next month. And according to our colleagues at the White House, that trip will still go on as planned despite this political shakeup. Zain.
As you mentioned, 3 elections in a very short space of time. Hadas Gold live for us there. Thank you so much. All right, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warns that Russia may intensify attacks during what he calls a truly historic week when the European Union is expected to decide on Ukraine's bid for candidate status. Russia is making gains in eastern Ukraine, capturing a town on the outskirts of Severodonetsk. Ukraine calls the fight for the Luhansk region very difficult, saying the situation changes every half hour. In the south, the leader of Russian-annexed Crimea says that Ukraine fired on drilling platforms in the Black Sea, injuring 3 workers. He says 7 others are missing. It's the first reported strike against energy infrastructure off Crimea since the war began. Our Sam Kiley is following developments tonight from Kharkiv in northeastern Ukraine. So when you think about President Zelensky's comments, Sam, that he expects a ramping up by Russia of attacks, especially as this EU membership is decided. Just walk us through what's at stake for Ukraine right now.
Well, right at the top of the list of Ukrainian ambitions, effectively, has been to join the European Union. That was the case in the Maidan protests that brought down the then Russian-backed president. Arguably provoked the Russian invasion, a Russian-backed invasion of 2014, and indeed the invasion earlier this year, because of course a pro-Western European member, NATO supporting country such as Ukraine with a substantial Russian-speaking minority, but a substantial one at that, would be deeply threatening indeed to an authoritarian leadership of Vladimir Putin in neighboring Russia. So Zelensky has said that he expects a reaction from the Russians, and arguably there has been. In the last 72 hours, there's been an increase in the intensity of airstrikes and missile strikes against Kharkiv, where I am now, and also this morning there was an increase in the amount of artillery landing on the outskirts of the city. On top of that, local military authorities, and we've seen the evidence for this, have said that there is a build-up of Russian troops between Kharkiv here and the border, which is only about 25 kilometers or so. And as a consequence of that, there's an anticipation that there'll be an attack against Kharkiv, a city that was liberated effectively about a month and a half ago, and a number of the villages around it liberated too from Russian occupation. A great and deep concern that those areas will now come under renewed Russian military pressure, and a lot of preparations going on for what is anticipated to be a Russian push here, just as there is an ongoing and extremely aggressive Russian push going on in the east of the country, particularly, as you mentioned there, around Severodonetsk.
Sam Kiley, live for us there. Thank you so much. All right, the United Nations Refugee Agency estimates that more than 1.2 million Ukrainians have crossed borders into Russian Federation since the end of February, but not everyone wants to stay there. Fred Pleitgen shows us how one Russian priest is using the full strength of his resources and his faith to help them.
The church, a single bare room in a former factory in St. Petersburg. But Reverend Grigory Mikhnov-Vaitenko's tiny parish is a humanitarian powerhouse. He's helped scores of Ukrainians displaced by what Moscow calls its special military operation get to the European Union.
There are thousands of people, because every day, few hundred people go.
Most of the Ukrainians sheltering in this hostel in St. Petersburg are from Mariupol, a city almost completely destroyed by artillery, airstrikes, and urban combat. On March 9th, the city's maternity clinic was hit, a now infamous incident that killed 4 people and wounded scores, including Victoria Shishkina, who lost her unborn baby. They did a cesarean operation. There was panic everywhere, but they said they have to save me, she says. They saw that the child had no more vital signs. They tried to pull him out and reanimate him, but the explosion hit me right in the belly and they couldn't save him. A double tragedy, as her husband Vladimir was also hit by shelling as he was trying to visit Victoria, killing a friend walking with him. I heard a loud ring in my ears and I thought to myself, I'm dead too, he says, but I looked down at my leg and my kneecap had been torn off. I crawled to a fence and screamed, help, help. Vladimir's leg later had to be amputated. Thanks to Reverend Grigori and his network of volunteers, they made it to St. Petersburg where, like so many, they stay free of charge at this hostel waiting to leave Russia. Ukraine has accused Russia of targeting civilians in Mariupol. Russia denies those claims and instead blamed Ukraine. Bogdan Stanchenkov and his family also escaped Mariupol. They lived near the Mariupol Drama Theater, which was bombed in mid-March, reportedly killing hundreds, though the exact number remains unknown. As his neighborhood was being flattened, Bogdan took his wife, his son, and his 8-month-old baby girl Kira and fled, ending up in southwestern Russia. Like everyone here, they want to get to the European Union.
Very many people.
Reverend Grigori says Russia does not prevent Ukrainians from leaving the country, but due to a lack of information, some end up in remote regions of this massive country.
They have no information. This is the main problem. They have no information, what they can do, what is possible to do, where they can go.
The costs of moving so many Ukrainians, some severely wounded, to the EU are massive. Reverend Grigori relies on donations, mostly by Russian hospitals, companies, business people, and ordinary citizens, some opposed to what Russia calls the special military operation, but afraid to speak out. Reverend Grigori left the Russian Orthodox Church in 2014. Its head, Patriarch Kirill, is a staunch ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin and supporter of the special military operation.
For me, it was not possible to stay there when they have a military church.
Reverend Grigori says he doesn't fear speaking openly about his opposition to Russia's actions in Ukraine. He only fears God. As he sees Victoria and Vladimir off, they've gotten the go to head to Germany, where Vladimir is set to receive a prosthetic limb. A bit nervous, but also grateful for the chance to start a new life, thanks to the help of Reverend Grigori and his band of supporters. For Pleitgen, CNN, St. Petersburg, Russia.
All right, Colombia has just voted in its first ever leftist leader. Gustavo Petro won Sunday's presidential election with just over 50% of the vote. The 62-year-old former guerrilla fighter ran on a green energy campaign and vows to work for change. The EU foreign policy chief says the election results show that Colombia voters are choosing a more inclusive, equal society. Stefano Pozzebon is in Bogota for us. So, Stefano, history being made here on multiple fronts. You've got Colombia electing its first ever leftist leader. On top of that, the country's first ever black vice president as well. What more can you tell us?
Yes, it's a fascinating moment for this country after the peace agreement of 2016 that brought to an end to more than 50 years of guerrilla fight, and after the dramatic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's remember, Colombia was particularly hit hard by the virus. For the first time in its history, the most conservative country in South America has decided that the recipe that was thrown in, before is simply not working anymore, and they're trying something new. But also it's a moment to check on the man itself, on Gustavo Petro, who completed yesterday with his victory an evolution that dates back from decades when he started his political activity as a guerrilla fighter. Take a listen.
Gustavo Petro, Colombia's first ever left-wing president. 4 decades ago, he was a guerrilla fighter, waging war against the Colombian state. Now, he's the head of state. After being detained for almost 2 years in the 1980s, he laid down his weapons and ran for political office. He was elected as a congressman, then mayor of Bogota, and then as a senator. He campaigned for the presidency 3 times before becoming president-elect on Sunday by a razor-thin margin of 3%, a sign that many remain concerned about his past. His election comes at a turbulent time in Colombia's history. The economy is flourishing, but the chronic inequality means that the countryside remains underdeveloped. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the inflationary wave that followed Russia's invasion of Ukraine only exacerbated Colombia's troubles. Food prices increased more than 20% this year, and Petro told CNN his focus will be on food security. He also said he wants to stop oil and coal extraction and open a new relationship with the United States.
Would you renegotiate a free trade agreement with the US?
Yes. He says he wants Colombia to export food rather than cocaine, fighting the war on drugs with agricultural subsidies instead of weapons. The challenges ahead are huge, and bringing the country together after a polarizing campaign is only the beginning. But Petro believes he's the right person to steer a new era, and says that if he could change from armed rebel to statesman, Colombia can change too.
And Zain, in that interview, Petro told us that he wants to open a new political dialogue with the White House, with Washington, a dialogue centered around 3 issues: protecting the environment, phasing out fossil fuels, and ending the war on drugs. And that he hopes that if he will be allowed to speak with President Joe Biden in person, he will be able to convince him that there is room for dialogue and common ground. Zain?
Right, Stefano Pozzoman live for us there. Thank you so much. All right, still ahead, no fuel, no food and no medicine. The IMF tries to throw Sri Lanka a lifeline as the country struggles to cope with its worst financial crisis in decades. And in a setback for LGBTQ rights in Japan, the Osaka District Court has ruled that the government's ban on same-sex marriage does not violate the country's constitution. We'll debrief next.
Almost all carbon emissions come from industries that shape our world. But at Standard Chartered, we believe progress doesn't have to cost our planet. That's why we're mobilizing $300 billion to help our clients change the way they operate, accelerating the transition to a net zero world. Because where others see problems, we see potential. We're Standard Chartered, and we're here for good.
They are Russian. I've spoken to the commander. He said they are now in control. Over that way. It's a secret location. They're going to fire on Russian forces. There has been a ferocious battle here. There's unexploded grenades everywhere. We're being shown the powerful American guns, giving them an edge. You downplayed the US intelligence assessment. Do you now regret that?
I'm in Kiev right now, and it is under attack, Mr. Lavrov, from Russian forces.
I'm being told by our security that we need to get our flak jackets on.
No matter where you are in this country, lives are being shattered.
There are thousands streaming out. It is at least a chance to save their own lives. Matthew Chance, CNN.
On Mission Ahead, a new spin on launching spacecraft into orbit.
As a species, I think we just always look up and we say, well, that's the next frontier.
Then, could this new zero-emission boat be the Tesla of the sea? Plus, preparing for the future, are cities that float the answer?
On water, buildings don't have to be static.
Meet the entrepreneurs and inventors who are taking mobility to the next level.
Mission Ahead, Saturday on CNN, in association with Fujifilm.
Right, let's take a look at the other key stories making international impact today. We are learning of a horrific attack in western Ethiopia. Witnesses and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission say that the rebel group, the Oromo Liberation Army, rampaged through a village Saturday, killing at least 200 civilians. The rebels who have been fighting government forces blame them for the killings instead. Heavy monsoon rains have triggered massive flooding in Bangladesh and parts of northern India. Dozens of people have died in landslides, lightning strikes and flash floods. In Bangladesh, flooding has submerged roads and highways and isolated entire districts. Millions are in temporary relief camps. The IMF has begun bailout talks in Sri Lanka as the country faces its worst financial crisis in 7 decades. A lack of foreign currency is stalling the import of fuel and food shipments. Meantime, Sri Lanka's cabinet has cleared the way to dilute the president's powers. Protesters are calling for his resignation. And Brazilian police have found the speedboat a journalist and an indigenous expert were traveling in before they were murdered in the Amazon. A suspect pointed investigators to its location. 2 others are under arrest and 5 more under investigation. British journalist Dom Phillips and indigenous expert Bruno Pereira went missing on June 15th. A district court in Osaka has ruled that Japan's ban on same-sex marriage does not violate the constitution. 3 same-sex couples had sued, arguing that not being able to get married was against Article 14 that says that all people are equal under the law. But the court rejected their claim, saying there has not been enough public debate about legalizing same-sex marriage. Under the current rules in Japan, same-sex couples cannot legally marry, and while some municipalities issue partnership certificates, couples can't inherit their partner's assets or have parental rights over each other's children. Japan is the only country among G7 nations that does not allow people of the same gender to marry. Joining me live now via Skype from New Haven, Connecticut is Graham Reed, Director of the LGBT Rights Program at Human Rights Watch. Graham, thank you so much for being with us. So it's interesting because Japan has actually made some strides when it comes to legislation regarding same-sex partnerships. So for a lot of people, this did actually come as somewhat of a surprise. Walk us through that.
Well, yes. Just last year in March, another district court came to an opposite conclusion and ruled that the exclusion of same-sex couples from marriage was indeed unconstitutional on grounds that it violated the provision on equality. And so we have 2 contradictory court rulings at the district level. Ultimately, the Supreme Court will need to decide as to whether the Japanese Parliament or Diet will need to pass legislation in order to allow for marriage equality in Japan. As you pointed out, as many municipalities and prefectures have already issued ordinances that recognize same-sex couples, which helps to a certain extent, but they are not legally binding.
Right, so there is some progress, but it's not coming. It's not expansive enough and it's not coming quickly enough. So when you think about what same-sex couples right now in Japan are experiencing, obviously they're not allowed to marry, as we pointed out, but also they're not allowed to inherit each other's, if one person passes, they're not allowed to inherit each other's goods or belongings, etc., and they have no parental rights over each other's children. Why is Japan so far behind other G7 countries when it comes to this issue?
That's an interesting question because actually the government lags behind public opinion. Recent polls from 2020 show that a high majority of people support legislation that prevents discrimination against LGBT people and also are in favor of marriage equality. Around the time of the Olympics, Japanese groups there, supported by international partners, held a campaign to push for non-discrimination legislation in Japan. The campaign was not successful in the sense that non-discrimination legislation was not passed, but it did bolster public opinion, and polls show that a very high proportion of Japanese public supports non-discrimination and marriage equality. And Japan has also played an important role internationally, supporting UN initiatives combating violence and discrimination against LGBT people. And so it's a little bit out of, and there's also a strong business case, of course, to make for marriage equality, as multinational corporations have weighed in, saying that this inhibits their ability to attract and retain talented and skilled staff. So there are many developments and social attitudes that are in favor of marriage equality. So it is perplexing that the government continues to lag in this respect.
Right, so if public opinion, is in support of this, then what will it take to make change? What will it take to make sort of strides in favor of same-sex marriage in Japan?
Well, groups in Japan have been very active in mobilizing and campaigning for non-discrimination and marriage equality. It's a slow and long process. As I say, this is likely to be ultimately decided by the Supreme Court, but that could take many years. And the government should simply pass legislation to extend marriage to same-sex couples.
Right. Graham Reed, live for us there. Thank you so much. Appreciate you joining us on this very, very important issue. All right. Looks like we're following some other stories for you with plastic waste spreading around the world. Now, Canada is moving forward with a plan to eliminate single-use plastics. It announced today it will ban companies from importing or making plastic bags, straws and styrofoam containers by the end of this year, ban their sale by next year and ban their export by 2025. Bags, takeout containers and straws are among the top items littering Canadian beaches, but a consortium of plastic producers is suing the government over its designation of plastics as toxic. All right, thank you so much for watching. That was your Global Brief. World Sport is up next. You're watching CNN.
Africa Avant-Garde in association with Access Bank. More than banking.
We need to start developing more writers. As a producer, I'm always on the lookout for new voices, new writers, because those are the foundations of good storytelling.
The best advice I've ever received is to never stop writing, because once you start practicing the thing that you want to get good at, you start having all those inflicting thoughts of, am I good enough?
To find your voice as a filmmaker or to tell stories that have deep impact, they have to be stories that affect you yourself. If it doesn't affect you, you can't translate that into a story. Whatever you write will be superficial. So first, if you're going to tell a story that is honest, it has to be honest to you first.
With Bitcoin, not only do we have the best monetary asset in human history, we have the best monetary network in human history. Bitcoin solved a lot of the monetary functions that we know as very expensive with cryptography and with math. And so I can escrow a bearer instrument in Bitcoin. It's worth the same amount in Chicago as it is in London, as it is in Nigeria, as it is in Argentina, and I can zip it around the world instantly and for free. What we can do is take your dollars and escrow them around the world over the Bitcoin network. So think about this. What if I wanted to send money from Chicago to London? What we can do is take dollars out of your bank account, turn it into Bitcoin, zip that value to London instantly and for free. You blink, you'd miss it. It goes so fast and it costs nothing. And then we turn it back into British pounds. That's the innovation, and that's how we use Bitcoin, the monetary network.
I'm Vedika Sood in New Delhi, and this is CNN.
Golf has a new major champion, and this one extra special for the man on his bag. Swimming's world governing body drawing the line with a controversial new policy restricting female transgender athletes from competing at the top level. Steph Curry and the Warriors celebrating their return to the top.
Then I got to the real question, is what they gonna say now?
All right, welcome to World Sport. I'm Andy Scholes, live from CNN Center in Atlanta. Well, Matt Fitzpatrick capping off a wild 2 weeks for the world of golf with a U.S. Open victory, but things don't look like they will be settling down anytime soon. Rumors continue to swirl that more high-profile names could make the jump from the PGA Tour to the LIV Golf Series by the time they host their first U.S. event in Portland a week from Thursday. And as we wait to see if any more players join the 17 who have already signed on with LIV, the PGA Tour has confirmed to CNN that Commissioner Jay Monahan will hold a meeting with the players Tuesday morning to provide, quote, several important updates and answer players' questions. Monahan is slated to speak with the media Wednesday afternoon at the Travelers Championship. All right, Matt Fitzpatrick, meanwhile, still certainly riding high after his narrow victory at the U.S. Open on Sunday. Now, this is great. Fitzpatrick recreating the picture with his parents and brother 9 years after winning the U.S. Amateur at the same course in Brookline, Massachusetts. Fitzpatrick and the great Jack Nicklaus, the only two golfers to win the U.S. Amateur and Open at the same course. And the 27-year-old actually stayed with the same family who hosted him for that amateur tournament 9 years ago. And hey, it certainly worked. Now, the shot of the day from Fitzpatrick was on the 18th out of the fairway bunker, and he gets it on the green perfectly. He would two-putt from there for par to maintain a one-shot lead. Will Zalatoris, who lost in a playoff at the PGA Championship, had that birdie putt to tie it, but just missed it. Fitzpatrick, your winner, celebrates with his caddy and then his family. And World Sport's Don Riddell caught up with him moments later to talk about winning his first major.
It was incredible. You know, I thought about what it potentially could feel like, and it felt like that and more. You know, it's just like a big release. You finish the tournament and you've won, and you realise that you've achieved one of your lifelong goals. And yeah, just the emotion kind of floods in, and it's just such a special day for me.
And you did it on Father's Day. I admit I got a lump in my throat just watching your family and your mum in particular and what it meant to her. How special was it to have all of your family around?
It doesn't get much better. Yeah, I've been very lucky in my career that you know, this is my 8th win. I think my parents have been at about 6 of them. So that's, I would say that's very rare for a lot of guys. And for me to have that is, you know, it is really, really special. And for them to share that with me this week is amazing.
So you didn't just win the US Open today, you also won the US Amateur here. There's only one other golfer that's done both at the same golf course. You know who that is?
Jack Nicklaus, yeah.
How cool is that?
It's amazing. It's amazing, you know, the best golfer of all time. To share any achievement that he's done is incredible, and for me to do that as well is, yeah, you know, I'm so proud of myself to be able to achieve that and say that. So yeah, when you're sharing records with Jack, it's pretty special.
So clearly, guys like you don't get to where you are without hard work and discipline. I've heard about your discipline, which just sounds like it's off the charts. Recently, you hosted a bachelor party, or a stag party as we call it in England,
exactly,
with all your mates in the house, and you shut the door and wanted no part of it. How hard is it to make a sacrifice like that?
Yeah, you know, for me, I just want to win, you know, and whatever it takes, it's for me is what I've got to do. And you know, I'm very lucky. My closest friends, they understand that too. They're all, some of them are athletes themselves as well, and they understand what it takes. And you know, they were brilliant. They had no issues. They understood that I was playing a major the next week, and you know, I did what I had to do, and it worked out. But it's things like that for me that I feel like, you know, give me the edge over other people. It's having that dedication, going out when no one else is, and working hard, and that's what's got me to this level, and hopefully just keep doing it.
You're kind of quirky. You do things your own way. You leave the flag in when you're putting, you chip cross-handed, you make notes after every single shot. Is that the kind of rabbit hole you have to go down to give yourself an edge?
I think so, yeah. For me, my game in particular, one thing that was holding me back was my length off the tee, and I've improved that significantly over the last year or so. And not only that, it's just, you know, I'm just trying to find every single way I can get better, whatever it is, and I'll try and find it. And I think because of that, it's you know, some days it pays off a little more than most.
So you're known to make notes in your little book after every single shot. Did you remember to mark one down after your final putt?
I don't know. I'll have to check.
I'd love
Let
to
me
know what
check.
that says.
Did I? No, I didn't. I didn't even write down how close it was, but I can remember it. So I'll do that later. But yeah, I've done that before a few times. Maybe, well, sometimes when I'm a bit more heated, I forget to do that. But yeah, today I can let it slide.
Yeah, and the win was also very emotional for Fitzpatrick's caddy, Billy Foster. He's been a caddy for nearly 40 years and has carried the bag for some of the biggest names in golf, including Tiger Woods and Seve Ballesteros. But in all those years, Foster had never won a major until Sunday. And caddies traditionally keep the 18th flags after a win. And the emotion from Foster, you could just see how much that win meant to him. All right, another swimming world championships means more gold for American Katie Ledecky. Coming up, we'll show you her latest triumph.
Back in person, the 2022 Afreximbank annual meetings will bring together high-profile continental and global leaders to harness and leverage Africa's incredible potential. Register now.
All right, we're back on World Sport with the World Championships in Budapest, Hungary. Katie Ledecky continuing her dominance. The 25-year-old regaining her throne as the 1,500-meter freestyle champ. Ledecky finishing a full 15 seconds ahead of fellow American 16-year-old Katie Grimes, who took second. Ledecky also won gold in the 400-meter freestyle on Saturday. She now has 17 golds at the World Championships for her career. Here's a fun fact for you as well. Ledecky owns the 13 fastest times in the 1,500-meter freestyle. It's quite dominant there. All right, we also saw a world record on Monday in Hungary. Italy's Thomas Chacon edging out Americans Ryan Murphy and Hunter Armstrong to win the 100-meter backstroke. Chacon clocking in at 51.6 seconds, beating the mark of 51.85 that Murphy had set back at the 2016 Olympics. All right, now the big news coming out of the World Championships in Budapest, Hungary on Sunday was FINA's announcement to restrict transgender women from competing in elite competitions. Sunday's decision is a new chapter in what has been a very divisive topic in sports. Now, along with announcing the new restrictions, FINA announced plans to establish a new open category for transgender women to compete in. Now, according to the new rules, transgender women can still compete if they have completed their transition by age 12. Now, more than 71% of the 152 swimming federations voted in favor of this new policy after hearing the findings of a report from a transgender task force comprised of leading medical, legal, and sports figures. Now, the new policy, it goes into effect immediately.
It is a policy that is based on science. It is a policy that we need to introduce in order to protect the competitive fairness of our event.
Now, the new policy means that American swimmer Leah Thomas will no longer be able to compete in elite races. Thomas competed collegiately on the men's team for 2 years before switching to the women's team her senior year after transitioning. Thomas became the first transgender athlete to win an NCAA Division I title in March, winning gold in the 500-meter freestyle, that is. After finishing her college career, Thomas said she hoped to one day compete in the Olympics, and she reacted to the news, telling ESPN the new FINA release is deeply upsetting, it is discriminatory, and will only serve to harm all women. Now, earlier, our Amanda Davis spoke with Effie Perry, Britain's first openly trans pro handball player, and two-time Commonwealth gold medal winning swimmer Mark Foster to get their thoughts on FINA's new policy.
Personally, I find it incredibly damaging. My heart goes out to any trans swimmer around the world, not just in the USA or in Europe, any of them. This is such a step back, given, as like Athlete I have said, from the latest IOC rulings. And yeah, to say that it's from affects all of these kids who go through puberty, in certain places, the medical care that these trans athletes would need from such a young age, it's becoming outlawed everywhere. So it seems like such a step back from, from where we should be going.
They say it is based on the science. What is your reaction to that, Effie?
It's strange because we've had so many other scientific pieces from, for the last few years that have claimed that there is no advantage to going through a male puberty in sport, whether it's swimming or any others. So I am concerned at who made up this this task force and the science they use to take from it, because it's so contradictory from the scientific studies that we've had recently. A lot of people always say about the supposed biological advantages of people who went through a male puberty but are trans women. And the analogy I always use is Usain Bolt, for example. He has all of these biological and genetic advantages that make him, such a good runner. Now, if you put him in on a 100-meter sprint with a runner from your local running club, has achievements, everything, 10 times out of 10, Usain Bolt is going to win that race. Now, why, and there'll be no complaints. So, he can't help obviously he can train and everything, but, kind of how his body is composed is part of what makes him so good. So it's strange that there's never complaints about this, but there is when women are trying to race against other women.
Mark, have you got a response to that?
It comes back to, and I know there's I don't know the exact terms here, X, Y, YX or something when you're born, and where is the line drawn in terms of whether you're born with a penis or a vagina? I don't know the exact right terminology, to be fair, but I'm only looking at it through my eyes, which is from what I see from the outside, and I don't know below the surface, and I don't know all the information, which is that if I was, for argument's sake, at 20 years of age, I realised, or I'd always known that I felt like I was in the wrong body, and I transitioned. And I don't know the process you have to go through. I know hormone therapy and everything else, but I believe, only from being on the team for a number of years and being at elite level for 23 years internationally, that I would have an advantage, because over those years of training and being a man, I would have gained extra strength. Except I'm not saying I would lose some of that, but I still believe that I would have a massive advantage over the women that I was then going to go up against. That's my belief, and I think the thing here is it's trying to look for a level playing field and trying to make things fair. And what is fairness? And I think what swimming is saying that is, okay, well, we'll create a separate category where trans athletes can compete at world level, so that women, and it is all about fairness here, that women, when they were born a woman, let's say, for argument's sake, that they don't feel then that a woman is coming and taking over their opportunities in the sporting world.
And thanks to Amanda, Effie, and Mark for that discussion. On the heels of FINA restricting transgender women from elite female competitions, both FIFA and World Athletics, which governs track and field, have announced they will be reviewing their transgender policies as well. They say that, like FINA, they will be consulting with medical, legal, scientific, and human rights experts on the issue. All right, just ahead on World Sport, can anyone stop the Red Bull charge? Max wins again.
Almost all carbon emissions come from industries that shape our world. But at Standard Chartered, we believe progress doesn't have to cost our planet. That's why we're mobilizing $300 billion to help our clients change the way they operate, accelerating the transition to a net zero world. Because where others see problems, we see potential. We're Standard Chartered, and we're here for good.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
Malumness, it's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, host of CNN's First Move. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers.
Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley, weekdays.
And we're back with Formula One, where this weekend reigning world champion Max Verstappen celebrated his 150th race with a victory at the Canadian Grand Prix, tightening his grip on the Formula One driver's title in the process. And it was just another dominant performance from the Red Bull star as he started in pole position and never really looked threatened all the way through to the checkered flag. Doubly important for his team, given that Sergio Perez was forced out with an engine failure. Now, the only pressure for Verstappen came from Ferrari's Carlos Sainz late in the race, but it wasn't enough to stop Verstappen's march to victory. Behind him, Sainz came in second, and there was a rare upturn in fortunes for Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton, who managed just his second podium finish of the season, just ahead of teammate George Russell. So Verstappen's lead at the top of the driver's standings is now up to 46 points from his teammate Sergio Perez. Charles Leclerc battled up to 5th from the back row of the grid to move to within 3 points of Perez. Now, for more on where things stand this season, World Sports' Alex Thomas caught up with F1 expert Phil Duncan.
Yeah, it was another great drive from Max Verstappen, wasn't it? A champion's drive, really, a champion's weekend. He was so convincing yesterday in qualifying, putting his Red Bull on pole in those wet conditions. And then today, you know, the victory never really looked in doubt. You know, even with Carlos Sainz there towards the end, putting him under a bit of pressure, it always looked as though Verstappen would be the man who would take the checkered flag. That's 6 wins now in 9 races for Verstappen. He's 46 points ahead of his teammate Perez, 49 ahead of Leclerc. That's, you know, the equivalent of 2 race wins. He's probably the best driver in the world right now. And as you say, it's looking like it's going to be very hard to stop him winning title number 2.
His rivals will be clutching at straws, won't they, Phil? But how concerned will Red Bull actually be about that Perez engine failure?
Yeah, I think any mechanical failure is a concern for any team. But I guess it was only Perez's second mechanical failure. Verstappen hasn't had one now for a good run of races. So, you know, I think it will be a concern, obviously, but I don't think they'll be too worried about it at Red Bull, particularly as they seem to have the fastest car and they have the fastest driver in the world at the moment.
So let's look at those rivals and anyone who can try and put pressure on Verstappen at all. Do Ferrari get some consolation from the way Sainz performed, especially towards the end of that race, and the way Leclerc sort of fought his way up through the field?
Yeah, I think with Sainz, I mean, perhaps not Ferrari, I guess, but Sainz will definitely take, you know, some joy, comfort out of that victory, that second place today. It hasn't been an easy season for him, and the way that he, you know, hustled Verstappen to the flag, there'll be some delight for him. And also, I guess, with Leclerc fighting from the back of the field, I mean, it's been a bad run of races for him, but he'll take, again, some joy from finishing 5th and sort of limiting the damage to Verstappen. But the fact that he's 49 points behind, and, you know, the ball is so clearly in Verstappen's court at the moment, in Red Bull's camp, that it's looking difficult for Leclerc and Ferrari. But we head to Silverstone next, which could be a track which might suit Ferrari. And as you said, you know, the performances today with Sainz and with Leclerc coming through the field will give them some confidence that it's not over yet. I mean, obviously, there's still a long way to go in this title battle.
And we've talked so much about the porpoising this season, especially the Mercedes car. How surprised then are you to see Hamilton back on the podium and Russell just behind him? Yeah,
surprised, I guess, because, you know, Mercedes were absolutely nowhere in practice in the dry on Friday. You know, Hamilton said it was a disaster in practice. He was well down the order, something like 13th. So to see him perform so well today, also, you know, off the back of his back problems in Baku, you know, it was only 7 days ago he was struggling to get out of the car, and Toto Wolff was raising questions as to whether he'd actually be fit enough to race in Montreal. So, yeah, a very good performance from Hamilton today. It was almost, you know, him back to his best at a track he loves so well. It was 15 years to this year that he won his first race in Montreal back in 2007. So he will definitely be pleased and encouraged by his performance today. He'll also be pleased to have beaten his teammate George Russell. That puts an end to a run of Russell beating him at every race since the first race back in Bahrain in March. And that was also Hamilton's first podium since the Bahrain Grand Prix. So again, yeah, good positive news for Hamilton ahead of his home race in Silverstone in a fortnight's time. But as he alluded to at the end, they're still a long way behind Ferrari, a long way behind Red Bull. Although they're closing, they're still only the 3rd best team, and it's going to take, you know, a bit of luck for them to be in the winner's circle. But they're improving, and they'll definitely take confidence from that.
Yeah, and up next for F1 is the British Grand Prix on July 1st. All right, back to our top story. Matt Fitzpatrick earning his first major title at the U.S. Open in Brookline, the very same venue that he won his U.S. Amateur title 9 years before. And let's celebrate that victory one last time in our Rolex Minute.
Matt Fitzpatrick became a first-time major winner with a thrilling victory at the 122nd US Open Championship